Mentorship for me it's all about paying it forward. You're not expecting this gift. You're not thinking anything would come to you. But then out of the blue, here's this assistance, this support, this shoulder to rest your head on, this person to help you brainstorm with things. But it's not just receiving. It's even more about giving. As you go through training and sort of life, you're able to pay it forward and to be a mentor and to find that person who needs a little extra help or you feel like has a lot of promise, and to give them assistance and mentorship and coaching.
Welcome to our first ever episode of Your Digital Mentor. Thanks again for joining us as we embark on this, our first maiden voyage. I'm Dr. Christine Boynette from the Wellcome Sanger Institute, but coming to you from home. And today we'll be discussing what is mentoring and what are the different types of mentoring. Joining me are the two very special guests, which is Dr. Grace Mwaura, who's the Fellows and Affiliates Manager at the African Academy of Sciences. She also coordinates the African Academy of Sciences Mentorship Scheme, and we'll definitely be talking to her about that a bit later. And our second guest is Dr. Lescano, who leads Emerge, the Emerging Diseases and Climate Change Unit. This initiative provides epidemiology masters and doctoral research programs at the Cayetano University in Peru. Welcome, Grace and Willy. I should also add, Andres also likes to go by Willy. So I'll start off with Grace. Can you tell us a bit more about yourself and what you do?
My name is Dr. Grace Mwaura, and I work at the African Academy of Sciences, where I manage our scientific community comprising of our fellows, over 460 of them, and our affiliates, 127 of them from diverse disciplines and across the African continent.
Thank you so much. And how about you, Willy?
Hi, I'm an emerging diseases epidemiologist working mostly on emerging infections here in Peru at Cayetano University. And I'm very passionate, in addition to research, I'm very passionate about capacity building. I've been working for a number of years, first setting up courses, then eventually epidemiology master's programs, and recently a doctoral program in epidemiology, and very committed to building capacity and also doing it with research integrity, promoting research integrity. And that's how we've come to the importance of mentoring. And after a few articles published recently in American Journal of Tropical Medicine Hygiene, met several of you who share interest in this important topic. Very excited to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much to both of you for coming. And actually, it's so great that we have two of you on the podcast because you're both very, very well versed in mentoring. And we wanted this to actually be our first episode, not only because our episode is called Your Digital Mentor, but, I think we all have had experiences of mentoring. And for me, one of the things I'm passionate about now is because, in my PhD, I wish I had learned how much a mentor is needed. And, these are things I'm learning later on in my research career, that a mentor early on would have really benefited me a lot more. So we're hoping that this is like a resource that people can use and can kind of listen and use in their daily lives and take forth. But I'll throw over to you guys, and maybe you can describe, first of all, what is a mentor and what is a mentee? I'll throw that to Grace.
First of all, I'd say a mentor is someone who is willing and motivated and committed to share with someone else their own experiences about their career and about their life, to challenge that person to grow in their own life, but also to offer guidance and support. You can have a mentor who is older than you, but you can also have a mentor who is your age, and that's what we refer to as peer mentoring. So in very basic terms, that's how to describe a mentor: someone who shares their own experiences, challenges you, but also supports and guides you in your own growth.
That's, really nice description. And Willy, do you have anything to add on top of that, like what a mentor is to you, and what do you see as the role of the mentor?
I would add to Grace's very appropriate vision of the mentor as a really broad, someone could be more advanced than you, but also someone who can be your peer. That's the new concept of peer mentoring. I would say the traditional definition of what a mentor is, I found one that I really like, that is wise and trusted counselor or teacher. And wise and trusted, each word is basically perfect because it needs to be somebody that has this knowledge that you can rely on, that is wise about it, but it's also somebody you have established a trust relationship. So as a mentee, you lean on that person for your personal and professional growth, not just the professional one, but also the personal side that is incredibly important. That divider that sometimes exists is broken, and you have these two dimensions of your relationship with the mentor.
I really like that definition as well, like the holistic, but also the guide portion. I mean, this will hopefully we'll cover it later in kind of how we came about the podcast, but our Twitter header is actually one where we have different words for mentor in different languages. And doing the research for that was, especially in Google Translate, it comes out as teacher. Even though it's not strictly a teacher, it's sort of a guide, as you say, a wise person that can give you advice. Grace, you also mentioned something about peer mentoring. What is that?
I would describe peer mentoring as a case whereby the mentor and the mentee sort of seem to be in the same, let me say, age bracket or level of experience. However, what they hope to learn from one another and challenge each other or even support and guide each other is something that either doesn't have. So for example, I may be wanting to grow in my public speaking skills, whereas my peer wants to grow in improving their scientific skills in the lab. So we may work together as peer mentors to support each other to develop those skills. In this case, you don't have one who is senior and one who is junior.
Thank you. That's actually really nice. It's one of the 4 that I could find. And I'm going to throw another one out there. Do you have, and this is to Willy, have you had experience with maybe group mentoring? Or my other favorite, and I'll come to Grace back with the virtual mentoring, but have you had experience with group mentoring, and how does this differ from a traditional one-to-one mentoring?
I gotta say, I haven't. Considering the scarcity of resources in low and middle income countries, sounds like a really bright idea, a really good idea. The closest I can connect to something like that is what we do in our research groups, where we have very few senior status type of investigators. Like we only are, in my research group, we're only 2 PhD graduates, 2 people with a PhD degree. So we have to spread out thin to try to cover and support our trainees and mentees. So that's, I would say, the closest, but doing it in a group way sounds like a very efficient way to use the limited time that we can devote to such an important activity as mentoring, but that competes for our time with writing grants and papers and conducting actual research.
True. I like that time saving, because most of the time, or sometimes you'd have maybe similar issues or challenges that you can tackle as a group and answer as a group and kind of everyone can give their feedback. I like the idea of group mentoring, even though personally I haven't experienced it. The other style of mentoring that we found in our research is distance or virtual. And obviously we are trying to form a digital version. But Grace, you have a lot of experience in setting up the mentorship program across Africa. I was wondering whether you can kind of tell us a bit more about the program and how you guys are delivering this type of mentoring across the continent.
Let me start by doing a bit of introduction to the AAS mentorship scheme, and then I will explain why we chose a virtual mentoring scheme. So our aim with this mentoring scheme is to help our early career researchers on the African continent to start transitioning to becoming well-equipped science leaders and all-rounded science leaders on the African continent, so that they can become independent researchers and actually can grow to actually lead the continent as far as science and technology is concerned. However, to reach the masses that we need to reach to actually start seeing change on the continent, we need to have, let me call them, capacity strengthening initiatives that are actually cost effective and it can be as broad as possible. So when we started exploring these options, mentoring was one of those, but then we were not going to offer face-to-face mentoring because on one hand you have limited mentors on the African continent, but also on the other hand you have a huge number of mentees requiring mentorship. So we developed this virtual mentoring scheme which enables us to match a mentee in Ghana with a mentor in South Africa or in Egypt or in Australia or in Europe, wherever they could be. And using the virtual technologies that are available, they can communicate with each other. What we realized and what was most important is that you need to remember what are the most important things in a mentoring relationship, which is having mentoring goals set up and having a time frame for that. And then what we were trying to do is to substitute the face-to-face meetings which occur when the mentor and mentee are in the same institution. So virtual mentoring scheme came in very handy because we were able to to allow mentors and mentees from different contexts to interact, to share their own experiences, but also it's time saving and resources saving, because if you can have a meeting monthly without having to spend a whole day to travel to each other's institution, then that's really an efficient way of doing it. So initially when we started, we were using email addresses to email our mentors and mentees. Soon we realized the numbers were growing, so this year we have moved on to an online mentoring platform, which eases our work in terms of matching mentors and mentees and connecting them, but also enabling them to start having conversations with one another.
That's really, really interesting and useful. And I like how you've kind of also touched base on, you're linking people from different countries and different cultures. And Willy, you were a first author in one of the articles that I obviously sort of helped us kind of guide how we tackle mentorship in low middle income countries. And I was wondering whether you can give us a summary of the outcome of the workshop you did in South America, Africa, and Asia, and give us an outcome of what you had to adapt from the guidelines set out in high-income countries to now low and middle-income countries, and how then you take into account culture as well and motivation and kind of backgrounds. I was wondering, Willy, if you can kind of expound on that a little bit more.
I think the bottom line is the end resources. What we lack in low and middle income countries are the resources that our universities and research centers in the north have. So we don't have the funded professors, the projects, the scholarships for good doctoral and master's programs. So in the absence of those resources, we need to make up the opportunities and the environments to establish mentoring. So one of the things we noticed is that we can do that within our doctoral programs and introduce mentoring as part of what the relationship is expected to be. So we started to talk to our doctoral advisors to try to build that in, and we also make sure that we only sending our doctoral students into established research groups. And we also started to talk to the research groups so they establish mentoring processes internally. It's not just that people do research there, but there's a goal, a formal goal to create mentoring processes internally. So in that way, we introduce the process and we use the environment and resources that already exist, like postgraduate programs and established research groups as vehicles to create mentoring. The other aspect of it is the actual presence of the mentee within the group, the physical presence. But I really like Grace's approach because they were ahead of their times and they were prepared for COVID, in which now with COVID we have the difficulty of not being able to be physically present in the same institution, in the same environment and work together. But with their virtual and distance-based mentoring, they don't have a difficulty with that. There's no barrier and there's no new barrier. They're already working ahead. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to adjust to work through the distance, and there are efficiencies and time savings, but we lack that individual connection, that physical connection that it existed before in our environments. And I hope that over time we can build that up through conference calls and virtual environments for mentoring and Zoom. But that physical part where you develop the connection between the mentor and the mentee, we need to work on establishing it in as strong as it was in the presential way.
Absolutely. And Willy, you've touched on a really important point, that this connection being made is one of the most important things. And from my experience of approaching mentors, it's usually people that I have a commonality with. And Grace, I was going to ask you, how do you then, as Willy has mentioned, trying to get this connection over Zoom or virtually, how do you guys get over this barrier? How do you do introductions to match mentors and mentees in the structure of the mentorship scheme in AAS?
The very first connection between a mentor and mentee has been through an email, and that has worked on very well because normally we know most of our mentees. At least in our first cohort we knew all our mentees, so we had a rapport with them and we could discuss on the kind of mentor they were looking for. And once we identified this mentor, then we'd do email introductions. However, because these are developmental models of mentoring. We do not, as mentoring coordinators, we do not participate in the first meeting of mentor and mentee. However, we offer them several tips on how they could go about it. One is we inform them that they are free to select what options will work best for them, whether they will have an email communication, a Skype communication, a phone call, a WhatsApp, or Zoom. Whatever option they choose that based on what is most feasible to them. Since the mentoring scheme already started at that note, both mentor and mentee were aware of the need to select what platforms to use. We also prepare the mentees with resources on how to approach these first meetings so that they're also very open to their mentors on what can work and can't work for them in terms of communication. That way, upfront, everyone already knows that this mentoring scheme will be heavily reliant on online forms of communication.
I really like that. And can you share slightly what are the guidelines? Because, it's very important to onboard and tell people how you want to be mentored and also how the mentor has time. What are some of the highlights or guidelines you'd give to someone starting a mentor-mentee relationship?
I hope I can remember all of them, but I will try highlight some of those that we guide our mentees with. One, we emphasize on the need for a mentee to have mentoring goals, because sometimes someone will come to you and tell you, I need a mentor, and then you ask them, what is it that you want this mentor to help you with? Of course, mentors can cover different aspects of your life, but here we are talking about an early or mid-career researcher who is aiming at transition to the next stage of their career. So they are very much aware of the gaps they have in their career and where they need to be building that, not only in their career, but also in their professional life, in their social life. Maybe they might be seeking being better at taking care of themselves, their own well-being, or how they can manage their families alongside work. So those specifics of what they are lacking and what they need to learn is one of the most important tips. The second one is them being aware of the need to invest in building a connection with a person who is going to become a mentor. Because in any mentoring scheme, the chemistry is very, very important. And this is one of the things that we highly emphasize on our mentoring scheme. If you connect with your mentor and your mentee and you don't feel the connection, you're not able to build that rapport within the first few months when you're laying the foundation, then there are chances that your relationship will not be as smooth. And then the third thing is appreciating diversity. So for example, let's say you're a biostatistician, but you want to learn how to work across disciplines. That might mean that the person who is going to be mentoring you will not be a biostatistician, but maybe from a very different background. And therefore, you have to be open to that kind of diversity, or even someone from outside your country, your continent, even different genders, different age groups. You have to be open for such diversity. They also need to be aware of the need to be flexible, the need to set time frames. So if you're saying you want to work on your public speaking skills, you want to say in the next 1 year or in the next 2 years, I want to have achieved this. And finally is the whole idea of the mentee being proactive. Really, for mentoring schemes at the level where we are offering at the AAS, the mentees really need to be at the forefront because it's their needs that we are prioritizing. So they need to be very much aware of, this is what I need to learn, and this is the type of mentor that I need to have. And once we help them to find this mentor, then it is upon them to ensure that they are reaching out to this mentor and maintaining this relationship as much as they can. So those are some of the tips we offer our mentees. We support them by having regular catch-ups with them. Some of them definitely will have specific issues. For example, even building the initial soft skills to enable them to communicate with a mentor. So we also work on those. And I think I would want to add at that point with a significant role of mentoring coordinators, because they're able to pick up these things from their mentees and as well from the mentors and work with them to ensure that the relationships are becoming stronger.
No, thank you so much, Grace. That's really nicely put. What I'm also picking up from the discussions of how you'd give a mentee the guidelines is also seeing how much time, by you knowing what you need, you can also ascertain how much time as a mentor you need to give to that mentee. And Willy, in one of your papers, you did mention, that time is also something that's a bit of a luxury. And how can we, not only as a mentor, you decide, and I think you did mention earlier, it's a willingness of someone to do it, but then how do you incorporate a program, a mentoring program into an institution? How do you get the institution to back it up and sort of support a program like this? Did you guys touch on that in the workshop?
We do. We do talk about the institutional component, both at the universities or research centers and also at the level of the national organizations that provide guidelines for the conduct of research and establish the research integrity framework for the country. So mentoring is incorporated into that research integrity framework. It's an obligation that the institutions that conduct research have. So people are over time allowed to consider their mentoring time as part of their contributions to the university, and eventually, hopefully, this can become paid hours for professors or investigators that have time commitments for research. But time, it is definitely a luxury. And that's why it's very important from the mentee's perspective that they understand that mentoring is a mentee-driven process in which they are going to get mostly what they put in it. So they're going to have to be the ones putting the most hours because they're gaining the greatest share of the benefit. Of course, mentors also benefit from the relationship. They learn new techniques. They advance new concepts, new technology. There are benefits on both sides, but I think the greatest benefit is always on the mentee side. So mentees need to understand that they're receiving a very valuable resource, the time of the mentor, and they need to use it wisely. So we talk a lot about time management and dealing with unexpected delays on deadlines and having to be really proactive and sharing with mentors when they fall behind, because it just happens that sometimes you fall behind, but you need to be able to communicate quick so you can adjust schedules, adjust these plans and milestones that you have established in advance, as Trace was indicating, because it's usually at this point, mentoring is not a financially supported activity. So you're getting free time from somebody who's really busy and fighting to keep its own career usually developing as well.
And you've touched on something that's, I want to ask to actually both of you. How do you get, as you know, we are passionate about mentoring. How do you get somebody to sign up as a mentor and knowing that maybe there's no financial commitment, or there'll be a lot of time involved in mentoring somebody? I'll ask that from Grace, and then Willy, if you can jump in again with an answer for that. How do you convince mentors to come on board to programs such as yours?
One of the most important things is for the mentoring coordinator to specifically communicate with the mentor whether they are offering any financial support or not to them during the mentoring relationship. In our mentoring scheme, we were very clear about this upfront, that we did not have the resources to compensate the mentor. And normally that one is required when you have face-to-face meetings, and either the mentor or the mentee have to incur some costs when they have to meet. In the case of virtual mentoring schemes, the only thing we are asking for them is their time commitment, because we don't want to assume that both of them already have internet access or otherwise. Therefore, the prior communication of that is most important, but also what we have attempted to do, and we are still trying our best way to ensure that we communicate this clearly to both our mentors and mentees, is the mutuality of learning in any mentoring relationship. You as a mentor, you're not just offering and offering and offering to the mentee, but also you get to learn from this particular person because there's something that they know that you don't know. And through the interactions that you have with them, you also get to grow as a person. So being aware of that, and that comes when now you start talking about listening to one another during mentoring sessions. So when you are aware of what this mentee can also add to you, then you realize there's also something you're gaining from these mentoring relationships. And we have seen this come out during some of the conversations we have had with our mentors about how much they have gained from the relationships they are having with their mentees, and how much they look forward to those conversations because they enlighten them and they make them even become better at their work.
I really like that. Willy, do you have any comments as well on how you encourage mentors in your program or within your field to sign on as mentors?
Yes, I think something that has worked is to work with relatively junior mid-career professors who have trained in an environment where mentoring is heavily used. People who have gone to train in Europe or the United States or Australia and have come back to the country. They understand how mentoring works, how important it is. They've been mentored when they were in their formative years. They really understand it and they want to pay it forward. They come, they're committed, they know how valuable it is. So it's really not hard to get them convinced. They're usually very responsible with their time. That helps also to frame their level of participation and commitment. And with that, they help the mentee to understand what they're going to do. So I don't think it's that difficult to have an established program to convince people to be mentors. It's just that they do say, I only have this many hours. I'm only going to be able to do this and that. But that's great. It just helps you to frame how to work efficiently with that limited resource. But people have often be very willing to participate if they come from that background and experience. So you try to give back to what your mentor gave you or your mentors gave you during your career.
No, that's actually really cool. And I was going to ask, now we're coming up almost to the end of our discussion, but, there's one thing I really wanted to ask. Let's say I'm, Joe Blogs from a random country wanting to start a mentorship program in my institute. You both have extreme experience and a lot of experience in this. Are there things you would tell somebody starting out? What were the kind of highs and lows, but also things to look out for when you're starting to start a mentorship structure? It could be digital or like you, Willy, it's face-to-face. I'll start with Willy. How would you go about giving somebody advice in starting a mentorship program?
I would plant the seed in the most fertile ground you can find in your institution or country. So if you have a good doctoral program or one of your research groups with young leaders who understand, who have trained in an international setting with mentoring programs, and they would value it and they would be willing to establish mentoring either in the doctoral program or in the research group, I would start there and plant the seed and help the tree grow so you can carry it as a flag, as a demonstration of success, of how can you do it, so you can show it to other groups. I wouldn't start at an institutional level because sometimes it is hard for institutions to commit the resources, particularly in the COVID environment that we're going to be seeing in the next future years where resources are going to be scarce. But I think that you look for your leaders, you look for your flag carriers who would show the success, show how it works implemented, and then you try to expand it to the rest of the institution, the rest of the groups.
I think in that you've kind of covered quite a really important point. You need people who can implement it at a very senior level. And this is what I like about, your program as well, is even though it's face-to-face, you're having to very quickly, like most people, learn to virtualize things. And now we'll move over to Grace, who's been doing this. And what would you say to somebody wanting now to start it? Unfortunately, we in the times of a pandemic, but would want to start virtualizing something like mentoring. Were there things that you kind of experienced as you were doing it and thought, these are the things mentorship needs to work in a virtual way, and you'd give to somebody as advice?
What I would say, and this applies to all mentoring schemes, not just the virtual option, is that before you set up any mentoring scheme, you really need to clarify the vision. What would success look like if you are to implement this mentoring scheme? So that was very important for us as an academy. We were very sure that what we wanted to be achieving is a critical mass of science leaders on the African continent, and therefore looking at what are the range of options that we have, and mentoring was one of those options. And because we knew we wanted to support a large number of mentees on the continent, then we had to choose a mentoring option that enables us to do that. And that's how we ended up with a virtual mentoring scheme. The second thing we needed to clarify is, whom are we going to be offering this mentoring support to? For us at the academy, we mostly work at higher education level and above, and most of the early career scientists we support are postdocs and above. And therefore, identifying that niche as the niche that we need to be supporting so that we don't have them dropping off the science careers. That was very important, because the moment we knew the group we were looking at, then we needed to then identify who are the kind of mentors who can support 30-something-year-olds to transition to mid-career positions. Those are the kind of things we were thinking about. This also required consultation with our mentees whom we knew and our mentors whom we were starting to bring on board. We had consultations with institutions that are running mentorship on the African continent and really around the world. We also thought about how to prepare people for mentoring. So we looked at the different kinds of mentoring resources that are out there and started to adopt what can work for us. So this is also another advice I could give to people who are initiating mentoring schemes, is that when you go out there and you want to build a mentoring scheme, look at what already exists, see what you can draw from that, and actually start building on that rather than trying to develop something completely new. So our mentoring scheme is actually a conglomeration of so many other initiatives that exist around the world, and our resources have been developed as a build-up to other resources that already exist out there so that we can complement each other in that way, and that also saves you a lot of resources.
No, that's good. And I like the whole don't recreate it if it's already a working system. That's actually one of the pieces of advice I got from my mentor once. Adapt, but don't try and innovate if that doesn't require something completely new. And as we're coming towards the end, we're going to take a quick break to hear from our sponsors. But when we come back, we'd love to hear from you guys what your take-home messages are.
This episode is supported by Advanced Courses and Scientific Conferences, a program which develops and delivers training and conferences that span basic research, cutting-edge biomedicine, and application of genomics in healthcare. Through engaging and networking, the events educate, inspire, and transform careers worldwide.
This episode is also supported by the Wellcome Sanger Institute. It undertakes large-scale research that forms the foundations of knowledge in biology and medicine. It uses the power of genome sequencing to understand and harness the information in DNA. The Sanger's discoveries are used to improve health and to understand life on Earth.
This episode is also supported by social entrepreneurship to spur health. The SASH group uses crowdsourcing to enhance health and health research with a focus on low and middle income countries.
Welcome back. We've covered a lot of things in the discussion, and I'd love for you guys to summarize 1 or 2 points for our listeners to take away from the discussion on mentorship. And I'll kick off with you, Grace, if you don't mind.
This might not be really a take-home, but I would say is a point that I haven't emphasized before, but I would want to emphasize here. Earlier, I have mentioned about building a critical mass of scientists on the African continent. And one of the things that our mentoring schemes looks at is the visibility of our scientists. So giving them the confidence, and that publicly, public-looking branding is equally very important. And we hope that through these mentoring schemes, we are able to present young and dynamic scientists from the African continent who are well connected, who are well prepared for the world, and also who are also doing very well at a social level, not just at the scientific level.
I really like that. So is that even another way you'd measure success in the mentorship? So on top of paying it forward, having a critical mass of mentors on signing up, is that how you'd measure success?
Yes.
Excellent. I like that. That was the quick yes. That was the short version. And how about you, Willy? Are there any take-home messages or a few take-home messages for our listeners?
Yes, do. I quote Master Yoda from Star Wars. Try not, do or do not. There is no try. We have to we have to launch this. We have to do it. It's impossible to do research without mentoring. It's impossible to build research infrastructure, research capacities if we don't implement mentoring. And the director of the Fogarty Center said, it's probably why science in the low and middle income countries have not grown more because of the lack of these processes. So we really need them in place. And it's not going to be perfect the first time we try it, but we still need to launch it and keep improving it as implementation science, phase expansion. Do it in one round, improve it for the next round, learn, establish lessons learned, and have indicators in place. And just keep on trying. And I want to congratulate you for these efforts. I think this is exactly what we need.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Willy. Actually, I know I'm kind of going on and on. It's supposed to be a wrap up, but I just wanted to touch one quick question based on what you've just mentioned, Willy. You've mentioned in low middle income countries that maybe mentorship and maybe research has kind of suffered from the lack of mentorship. And with these programs that both of you are implementing, do you think that this is affected by kind of maybe cultural differences and how we attack mentoring, or how we kind of attach ourselves to mentors and the type of advice you'd give somebody? I don't know if there's an answer to this or it's just a thought. How do you change cultural thoughts on mentorship, and how do we improve it? If it hasn't been there before, how do you improve it?
One of the issues we touch in the articles is the issue of the verticality and high hierarchy of low and middle income countries. The fact that we look with so much reverence to our seniors and the distance we sometimes place with them, doctor this, doctor that. And we then go to high income countries and everything is on first name basis. So I think in that way, our culture in some way is a little bit of a barrier for the development of these strong relationships that are part of the basis of mentoring. So we need to deal with the verticality. We need to deal with the age structure. We need to deal with their gender roles and appreciate the importance of diversity. We need to adjust a little bit our culture to be more inclusive and embracive. I think that's going to help for the next generation. And that's where I think our generation of young professors who have trained abroad, who have come with all of these values and come back to our countries, I think they can play a very important role and complement the leadership and the values, the many positive values of our cultures as well. But I think there needs to be some tweaking, some adjustment to take full advantage of the importance and the value of mentoring.
I really like that. And Grace, would you have anything to add to that?
I'm not sure how this will fit into the bigger question you asked, but I thought I should build on what Willy has said, because one of the things that I have found really moving in the last 6 months of the AAS mentoring scheme is how the relationships have been able to enable our mentors and our mentees to work on their own well-being, not just during the lockdown, but also the everyday career, the everyday life of a young scientist on the African continent, or really any scientist on the African continent. I want to believe it's the same for Willy, is that their challenges are unique to the continent. You are fewer, you have limited resources, there's much politics to deal with, and there's also the pressure you have on you as a person to perform and to move to the next level of your career and to get the next grant, but also to establish a family. You've been put on the spotlight by everyone else. And then how does mentoring actually help you as a person to find yourself during these times and be able to work on all these things harmoniously, but also not beating yourself too hard when you're not able to do everything all the time? So some of the conversations I've had with some of our mentors and our mentees is how these conversations have looked like, where we have had issues of people being fatigued because of working for longer hours. But when they open up to their mentors, they're actually able to realize, oh, I actually don't need to be doing all this sometimes. Sometimes I can let go. Sometimes I can manage my teams better to help me deliver on the work that I have with me. So for me, that has been a highlight. It's something that mentoring schemes don't necessarily talk about. So currently, we are figuring out how we start measuring these kinds of intangible benefits of mentoring schemes, because they're really, really important. Because by the time someone turns up for science, there's so many other things they have to deal with. And hopefully mentoring can help to deal with those things so that we can have all-rounded and happier and great scientists on the continent.
Thank you so much, Grace. I'm nodding furiously and nodding to both of your points because you both touched on something so important. I'm glad we extended this kind of wrap up to a really important discussion, especially now that, we're all faced with something very terrible outside, but yet we are able, some people, in research, we are able to still continue working at such a high level. But then, I saw a really great quote on LinkedIn saying, we're not working from home, we're trying to work at home in the course of a pandemic. So I think it's really nice that mentees and mentors are opening up to each other and realizing that they're not alone. And this is kind of what maybe it'll strengthen any mentorship relationship. Willy, would you like to add to anything, or we can move on to wrapping up?
No, I just want to reiterate my congratulations to you for this podcast, because one of the things we noticed in our articles is that there were no models or schemes for mentoring adapted to the conditions of low and middle income countries. And this is exactly what we consider a step forward, adapting what we have in the literature towards us, towards our settings, our conditions, our culture. So congratulations. I look forward to the next stage as I will have my trainees listen to your podcast, and I'm looking forward to your work.
Please do. And thank you so much. We're really honored that you both could come on and also give us such high compliments. And this is exactly what we're trying to do, just to get this conversation. I've really, really enjoyed just listening to both of your points. I'm learning, and I'm hoping other people, I'm a mentor-mentee, and I'm learning from both of you in how to move forward. And this is the whole point of it, just people talking and talking about interesting things. So I'd just like to say thank you both for joining us, and I'd like you to share with the listeners where they can find you, either on social media or a website. Over to you, Grace.
Yes, you can reach us on the African Academy of Sciences website. That's www.aasciences.africa. You can also follow us on Twitter at AA Sciences, and as well you can follow me at Grace Mwaura.
You can follow us at Emerge UPCH, that's for Universidad Peruana Cayetano Heredia in Peru, mostly in Spanish, terribly sorry, and also W. Lescano and social networks. And just wanted to add one last thing. We never stop being mentees, regardless how old we can get and how much gray hair there may be. We're always learning.
Oh, thank you for that parting thing. I always say I'm still a mentee and always trying to acquire new mentors. And thank you again, Grace and Willy. And for our listeners, thanks again for tuning in. Please follow us on Twitter at mentor_podcast. That's mentor_podcast, where we'll let you know when new episodes are released. You can also listen to us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or SoundCloud by searching for Your Digital Mentor. Information on the episode will be in the description box, including how to connect with our guests and also links for more information.